everybody, and welcome to One Sustainability. I am James Rosenstein, a member of the advisory board of One Business World. One Sustainability features entrepreneurs, founders, and business leaders who have sustainability as a core component of their overall strategy, presenting on cutting-edge topics and the latest industry developments. Our goal is to educate and inform the global business and entrepreneurial communities on the importance of sustainability and to promote and support sustainable business growth all around the world. Today, we're very pleased to welcome leading sustainability entrepreneur, Daniel Nelson. Daniel Nelson is the co-founder and CEO of Grow Computer. Dan is an experienced founder and entrepreneur who has been captivated with hydroponics and smart urban farms since trying to build a smart irrigation and plant monitoring system on his balcony for his 17-day honeymoon. Grow Computer has connected with growers in over 30 countries around the world and has developed a platform that can power any growth for any plant anywhere in the world. Dan, it is a great pleasure to have you here with us today to hear more about how controlled environment farming will impact the economics, technology, and sustainability of future food systems. Thank you, and welcome to One Sustainability.
Thank you, James, for such a kind and warm introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be back with the One Sustainability group, and I've really enjoyed the messages that this community is able to drive. And it's fun to be able to be part of the conversation with, a really interesting insight and take that I've started to develop and cultivate over the last so many years. And as James mentioned, my question really starts with a very simple idea. How do I keep my plants alive for 17 days on my balcony? And this question struck me because it felt very relevant to what I was learning about through the changes in the agricultural systems as we were experiencing in 2015 and 2016. For those that don't remember, California was in one of its worst droughts ever. And you start to look at where food comes from. And I started to begin an odyssey of simply understanding how I, as an entrepreneur, can control my garden when I'm not staring at the plants. And so this question was captivating. So I started with a balcony and I started building and designing and tinkering with different controlled environment farming systems and technologies, until ultimately we found a Grow Computer with an idea that I'll talk about in a little bit. But the real important thing about what Grow Computer and my journey has been is that it's not about us, but it's about what we've been able to listen to folks doing around the world and how they're growing and building businesses. And before I continue, it's important to back up and talk a little bit about who I am and why it's kind of unlikely that I'd be here, but also kind of makes sense at the same time. I am a recovering accountant by trade. I was a CPA earlier in my career. And since then, I've been using those quantitative skills with startups, small businesses, and corporations to help understand how their businesses work and how we could break down these systems to understand how they make money, how they spend money. And ultimately, over the last few years, I've had a chance to work with hundreds of entrepreneurs as a virtual CFO and really understand how their unique businesses work and how they're thinking about it. And so listening to growers and entrepreneurs, I started using a pretty common ag tech pitch to qualify how big this was. And almost every ag tech entrepreneur will go through this. It's like the Rolling Stones when they play Satisfaction. Everybody does it at some point, and it's a hit because everyone knows it's coming. And the thesis is, and the big ag tech pitch is that by 2050, we're going to have 2 billion more people on the planet than we have now, maybe 10 billion. 70% of those people are going to live in cities. And then more interestingly is that their demand for consumption is projected to change because folks are coming out of poverty and having more disposable income to spend on food. But the other side of the pitch, so if you're talking about why the ag market's so exciting, the other side of the pitch is the vertical farming pitch, which I've actually used, where it's the future of agriculture. Because of what a vertical farm is designed to do is to provide consistent, rapid, and year-round yields. They're hyper-local, they're reduced water in plants, and they can be tailored. And while both of these are right, they're also kind of wrong and misguided in a lot of ways. And only since looking through this journey do you realize that agriculture is really awesome right now. When we look at the way the food system is designed and the amount of scale that we're able to build into everything that we're doing. For example, on this video over here, this is 14 million onions in one farm in Washington. And so we're looking at this amazing amount of scale and development, industrial ag, that those first two pitches are kind of wrong because we're able to generate more returns, more output with consistent amounts of land, less labor, and less technology in a lot of ways. And so if this is the future of food, but we're also really good at growing now, why is this important? And it's not in the success or failure of industrial ag. It's in the costs that we're starting to look at and how these are changing that are going to rapidly define how we're able to do this. In the United States, this is 2019, 2021 is even more. The last 3 years, we've had the most billion-dollar weather disasters that we've ever had in the United States. Whether it's a flood, a fire, a drought, a tornado, a hurricane, hail, any of these things, oftentimes the impacts are only marginally felt to consumers. But when you look at the impacts to farms, where you're talking about time and the investment of time that could be wiped away by one natural event, there's a huge externality and insurance risk that's going up, and your farmers are seeing it on their premiums. There's also the challenges of foodborne diseases and foodborne problems with our logistical systems. You're starting to see soil runoff in many parts of the country due to the externalities of this factory farming. And around the world, we're even seeing locusts. And when you add all of these things up, it's in my view that traditional farming is becoming much more expensive at the same time that we're seeing these exponential declines in cost structures for controlled environment ag. And so while we're not here today, we are starting to see certain places where it already works. Most of our lettuces on the East Coast, we're starting to see strawberries, mushrooms, cannabis, obviously, flowers are already in the money using these controlled environment systems. But what's really exciting is that we're starting to see the next level of crops starting to fall into the money. And the rest of the conversation is going to start to be how we can look at each of these markets and figure out how any crop is going to help, or any business can build a successful, economically viable entity using any crop by looking at the markets, the way the businesses operate, and then the cost structures within. And so the first one to jump into that is the most high level is markets. And what's really cool to remember is that this is not just happening in New York or Silicon Valley. These innovations are happening all over the world. All it takes is a quick search and you're seeing entrepreneurs and innovations happening in business models, technologies, and crops everywhere. And one of the reasons why is that the people around the world are changing, and they're changing in their composition of economic viability. In the United States alone, we have risen 4 billion people out of poverty just through COVID. But while that's great, what's cool to see is that economically speaking, as folks' economic outcomes are increased, their demand for fresh fruit and vegetables increases faster than almost anything else. And so as you're seeing new markets emerge, you're seeing new demand for different types of crops in different areas because people are more able to say that they want these crops, purchase them, and build a marketplace to bring it in. And so with that demand, you're seeing government investment go up. And I'm going to leave this chart here because I'm not sure what it's saying. But if you look at the United States in 2021, we've doubled our direct payments to farmers from last year in 2020, which was also double what it was the year before. And so the government is supporting the development of farms with direct payments to farmers and subsidies, while at the other side, you're starting to see a lot of really interesting ag innovation happen at the rest of the G20 world. This graph is a little dated, but you're starting to see, China in this graph is investing outsized and much faster than the United States in agricultural technology because they see these changing demands. And so in the United States, while the government might be paying farmers, there's a really incredible ag tech investment boom that's happening in VC. Last year alone, there was $1.86 billion just for indoor farming startups. That is a tremendous amount, and it's growing exponentially because investors are starting to see that by developing these new food systems that are more resilient to the externalities of farming, that you can create markets at every market level. And so for each crop, there's a global market, there's a national market, a regional market, and even a local market. And so as businesses are developing, entrepreneurs are able to take advantage of opportunities in each of these spaces. And so New York City, for example, my hometown, is, for most people, you would just think it's New York. But New York is actually per capita one of the highest density ag tech investment sites in the entire world. Within 20 miles of Times Square, you've had over $1 billion invested in the last few years. And you see a tremendous amount of innovation that's happening in this space. And so investing is happening. You're starting to see big farms being built. And how does a local farmer, how does a small entrepreneur start to take advantage? And the way to start to think about it is with free tools. And how do you take a look at what all of these great institutions are building and figure out how to make it work for you? One of those great things that's available is Grow Intelligence. I could not recommend this tool enough. I've gotten most of my research here, but what it actually does is it's digested as much agricultural data from governments, NGOs, and other entities around the world and built really cool data models that you could pull things out of, like the global banana market from 1920 to 2020, and all sorts of other fun things. But if you're trying to figure out how big your market is, this is a great place to start. And before we get to revenue, which is a really fun exploration of vertical farming and some of the innovations, I have to talk about costs, because this is where everything starts to get gummed up. And my favorite way to think about it is, what is a calorie, right? The simple entity of energy that we eat for a thing of food is essentially not much different than a battery. And so when you think about developing any sort of technology where you're developing calories in a controlled environment, there is an energy conversion that needs to come in. And so a fun calculation is that if you think about your average 60-watt light bulb, it uses about 60 joules of energy per second. And a calorie is 1,484 joules. So one food calorie is essentially equal to 70 seconds of a 60-watt bulb. And so if we're talking about feeding the world, your energy calculations about how much that needs to go into this start to get blown apart. And it's first because when you start thinking about the biomass that you're actually harvesting and eating, you could start with leafy greens, which is where many businesses do. And you harvest 90+% of the plant that you grow. And so in that sense, it's an ultra efficient store of energy. But when you start looking at things like tomatoes, and anyone that's grown a tomato knows that you're growing a huge plant for how many actual pounds of output. And so there's a conversion there where not only do you have to grow the tomato, you have to grow the entire plant. And even thinking further about a fruit tree, that goes further because you have to think multiple years. And so the questions that start to come up are, how does this farm grow a lot of this, but how do they get out and start to do other things, right? How does the generation of produce from whatever you're harvesting pay for all the capex and the opex that you need to put into it? And that is where it's going to take innovation. And we're starting to see really great stuff happen with capex and automation. You're starting to see systems that are built based on fairly traditional mechanics, where you could build an entire system to grow plants from seed to harvest where no humans ever touch them. But by using these automated racks, you can automatically seed, you automatically move it through the growing, and then you're harvesting it. And so at some point, you have to figure out what the economic return is of all of that lettuce on all of that capex. Another cool thing that's happening is Haitz's law. Anyone that's heard of Moore's law, Haitz's law is the same thing that basically says over time, we're seeing exponential decreases in the cost of an LED light while we're seeing higher output. And so as that energy conversion of energy to light gets more efficient, then we can be more efficient in converting that light back to calories. And so other things that, and this is, I'll talk a little bit about Grow Computer and what we're trying to do. At Grow Computer, our goal has been, how do we figure out how to go analog to digital so we can go back to analog? And what that means is that all of these systems exist in the real world, but to us, to unlock the systematic opportunities, you need software. And so at Grow Computer, we've been trying to figure out how we could deploy a system of hardware to growers to give them the tools to manage and control their own systems. And I think we've done that. We're going to be we're relaunching soon, but we have a component ecosystem and an open app platform. And the idea is that if you want the sensor data or you want to be able to control something, that should work together with your software. And while it sounds basic, every single company is ending up doing this. And it just creates a lot of challenges, because if you could unlock this, now you start to think about this amazing operational and systematic efficiency that can come in with better digital systems, right? Once you could figure out your own system, then you could figure out how to optimize it and plan it and know how much yield you'll get consistently. Then after you have that data, you could layer in AI and machine learning and operational efficiencies. You could add in drones. And then after that, you could start to talk to other farms in the area. It doesn't make any sense for 5 farms to produce as much as they can at the same week, because then they're going to all have to figure out those same challenges. And so if you could start to have farms coordinate with each other, you can open up exciting new opportunities. Some things are drones. And so when you start thinking about what you could bring in, at the end of the day, it's allowing these systems to talk to each other anywhere that they're configured. And so, with greenhouses and verticals, there's 2 ways to do it. Sorry, this is a bit of non sequitur, but thinking about how you're going to build these systems, any physical system generally is a greenhouse or a vertical system. There's some great analysis that's been done by Agritecture and some other really smart entrepreneurs talking about these actual cost structures. And then lastly, why it's a great time to start a business, and some of the advantages that entrepreneurs have is that you don't really have to build anything anymore. I teach this to all of my clients, is that right now, building a company in 2021 is the easiest time to ever build a business, because you have access to all of these tools and technologies. Anyone that remembers a startup or a web company in the early 2000s where you had to have a huge server in your office versus now where you use AWS is a great example. You don't have to build these things. You can license them and basically rent these services. And these services can open up huge outsized exponential gains in yields. And one such service that these are great friends. And so the Agritecture folks, who is a consultancy based out of New York originally, who helped develop a lot of the communities that I've learned everything I know from, have built a tool that helps founders and entrepreneurs go through the planning process of saying, if you are going to build this farm and you want to invest in this lifestyle, how do you know where to go? What kind of building to look at? What kind of market to look at? And they can really bring you all the way through it. And so it's a great tool that, once again, is helping to distribute access to these tools, services, and technologies to entrepreneurs so that they can build really cool businesses. And so as we look at this last part, let's talk about some of the ways that these are coming together and looking at how these companies are making money. First, I believe there's a great upstart university concept called the four markets. And so at the end of the day, there's really four main ways that any farmer will sell their crops. The first one is a farmer's market, right? Direct to a consumer. A CSA is a community supported agriculture, basically a membership where you get a farmer's box every so often. You can sell directly to restaurants, or you can sell to grocery stores. And each of these requires a different type of planning and processing. And so as you're taking advantage of this, there's really great opportunities with vertical farming. And so, for example, a couple farms that we love that are based in New Jersey are using consistency to help them sell to both restaurants and grocery stores. Because at the end of the day, if you can tell a grocery store that you know how much pounds of kale or whatever crop you'll have and the weekly generation, they can more effectively do their planning. And the consistency of churning out high quality produce every week is a skill. And so as they get better at it, they're able to take advantage of these new opportunities where you can pre-sell. And so we're going to look at another one that does this, where in Nigeria, one of the advisors for Grow Computer built a company or built an organization where they're able to help do this for farmers in Nigeria, where they've built a greenhouse that does seedlings, and they sell seedlings to local farmers. And what they're doing is guaranteeing a price per pound of the produce. And so for the farmers, they could sell them the seedling and guarantee a market price back. And then using technology, the startup is trying to improve the average yield of that individual farmer from X% to Y%. And so why all of this is important is because when you put all of these together with the consistency and the planning, now you could open up new types of financing and financial contracts and insurance. And when you can do that, now you're able to give farmers an entirely new access to financial markets. And financial markets and access to capital is oftentimes the lifeblood that will help any small business turn into a bigger business. Another cool model where they're trying to take advantage of these indoor and controlled environment opportunities is in India. I had a chance to meet a really exciting group of young entrepreneurs where they realized, and they were upset, that the price per pound of peppers and capsicum was crazy high in rural areas. Yet it's a big part of their community and part of their cuisine. And so their idea is that if they could figure out a consistent approach to a greenhouse, that they could start to distribute these farms strategically throughout these regions and deliver that high quality product to that market that demands it. Other cool opportunities are happening with mushrooms. Another great New York company is Smallhold, where anyone that's been in a Whole Foods in the Northeast, you might see a mushroom butcher that exists right next to the produce aisle. And that's designed by a company out of Brooklyn who looked at how do you deliver a new world of mushrooms directly to customers. But while it's happening in Whole Foods, the mushroom revolution is also happening in places like Syria, where Syrians who had never had a big use of mushrooms in their culinary skills are looking at mushrooms now as a really great source of protein to supplement their diets because of the geopolitical situations that are going on. And so, yes, it's happening here in New York City in Whole Foods, but there are opportunities and applications of that same idea where you're inoculating a substrate and getting mushrooms produced is universal. What's also cool is that you're starting to see how vertical farming can be used for more higher value crops. And saffron, that beautiful spice, is traditionally grown out in Iran. And there's an entrepreneur in Iran that's using vertical farming to try and develop a new model of saffron cultivation. And he says that in 100 meters square indoors, he can have the same as a hectare of outdoor cultivation. That's a tremendous return on yield. It's a return on consistency. It's a hedge on the variability of climate. It's a hedge on worker shortages. It's a hedge on consistency. And so you're starting to see how vertical farming as an idea is unlocking these new businesses and unlocking these new opportunities to bring food to people all over the world. Another huge input is animal feed. And there's a great company that we know called Dry Grow, and they're looking at vertical farming and greenhouses to grow agricultural feed and inputs. Right now, it's corn, grain. There's another input called lemma that's really a great input for the beginning of the poultry value chain and some other inputs. And so now you're looking at how the economics of that animal feed can be attacked by vertical farmers that could once again generate high quality, high efficiency, high yield returns. And maybe one day we'll be able to do it for wheat. I think that's the nature of these exponential cost curves. I think we don't really know what it's going to look like because of these developments, but maybe in 20 or 30 years, there's a need where we could do it for wheat. And someone did the math and they believe that it could be 600 times more effective per meter of yield cultivation if we were to do vertical farmed wheat, maybe. And so as you start to look at all of these different opportunities and the costs in the markets, there's just a few takeaways. And my first one is this quote by Kimball Musk, who's Elon's brother and one of the co-founders of Square Roots. And he said, "Food is the new internet." And this quote really struck me because it's indicative of how much change and development he was expecting to see in this time. He said this, I believe, in 2014. It's 2022, and those same companies have raised billions of dollars of funding, opening up new farms all over the world. We're seeing new businesses take shape everywhere, and we're just getting started. I think food is obviously one of those things that everybody needs. And so it's really exciting to see how these trends are shaping up to a really exciting future. And one of the cool things that you start to see is that we're starting to bring the farms to where people live and disperse it directly to a market, or maybe directly into the cafe, or maybe tomorrow the farm will be in your kitchen. Maybe this might be a little further away, but wherever you go, you're going to start to see how the growth of plants, maybe not just nutritional, but nutraceutical as well, can be brought to where people live, and everybody is attacking it. But until then, as these costs are still prohibitive, the one place that I am so excited about with hydroponics is, before we talk about the food system and before we talk about everything else, is actually in education. And hydroponics and education is something that is happening also around the world as a way to teach students about the science and technology and systems and businesses that are going on right now. New York City, I think, has over 800 school farms and gardens, and it's happening everywhere. And why this is beautiful is that when you're looking at education and students and researchers are driving this innovation, the costs don't matter as much because the process is as valuable as the output. And so, while you think that what could a school do? I don't know if you all see this, but this is a school in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and they're growing cocoa trees in their garden. And so these are cocoa beans that, the story is that they told me is that the Hershey's executives came and saw it and said that in the 3 years that they had been growing their plant, that plant had the maturity of one that was double in age. And so you start to think about, all right, now we're growing chocolate trees in Pennsylvania in a greenhouse at a hyper effective and controlled way. Maybe there's something here. But more importantly is that if we could take these local business opportunities with this energy There's problems everywhere in the United States. There are food deserts that exist in the middle of farming country and everywhere else. But there was a really great analysis that said that almost everywhere in the United States, we could build local farms. You could see local businesses. You could see organizations pop up to deliver food to all of these places. And so to me, the real exciting thing is the growth of these people that are attacking it and trying. And over the last decade, we have seen an amazing growth of this attention and this energy. And so I'm not saying I have the answers, but I'm saying that you can see how all of the energy and all of these trends are shaping up, that we're just getting started. And that the future of farming and that the future of where we get our food and thinking about how these systems work is going to drive a lot of decisions that are made societally, on human scales. But I'm very bullish about it. And I think that there's going to be a really exciting future for everybody where everyone's fed with exciting new opportunities of cuisines, palates, maybe even medicines. And so thank you so much for the time. Thank you all for joining. I hope this was an enjoyable ride.
Well, Dan, thank you so much. This is so amazing. It's quite impressive, and it brings a couple of questions to mind because, here we think about renewable energy. All of this is happening more and more. And the question is, what's the percentage of renewable energy? Will it really help, and how quickly to lower climate change and all that? And it makes me think about this as well. So my first question is, in the future, and how far into the future, what is the percentage you see of this new kind of farming in the overall agricultural demand?
It's interesting. I think it's going to be a mix of everything. And so what that means is that in local regions, you're going to see local crops that are, greenhouses. You're going to be able to have organizations that are supplying, local chefs, local restaurants, local CSAs, farmers unions, entities all over the world. And that's never going to change. And I think, we're skewed at how big agriculture here is in the United States because it is massive. I had another slide at some point looking at the scale of how big and how old some of these growers are. And it's crazy. But, you talk about energy. And so energy is interesting because there's an efficiency opportunity of energy as much as there is of just creating new energy. And I think what's really exciting is that, you start to see how some energy companies, I know the Southern Company in Atlanta has been talking about this already, but the energy grid is built to have a certain amount of energy capacity. And that's based on basically peak load of air conditioning units at 3 a.m., right? The energy grid kind of needs to sustain at that max load, or you'll have systematic trouble, like sort of like what happened in Texas. But throughout other times of the day, there's extra energy that can be generated and used. And so, if you're building a completely artificial farming environment that is dependent on light, energy, water, and nutrients and plant genetics, then that doesn't have to be matched when we say our day is. And so I think that there's cool opportunities around the edges where you could, basically arbitrage extra energy that you get it for cheap, you get it for reduced costs, that you're able to mitigate a lot of your cost, a lot of your high level line items of just energy costs. Because if you're running all vertical farms and all LED lights and HVAC systems, it gets expensive. But if you're able to time it at the right time, now you're taking what was almost a liability and turning it into an asset, which is kind of where that circular stuff starts to come in and gets really interesting because you have the technology to drive those models.
Right. So a related question is, just like the fossil fuel industry is reacting strongly in many ways against the growth of renewable energy, as you know better than most people, so many countries depend almost entirely on agriculture, on what they sell, and so many millions of people depend on agriculture. So over time, how do you think that these people and the industry is going to react to the growth of vertical farming and hydroponics and all that? Because they're so dependent on agriculture. While at the same time, everybody knows that the environmental impact of regular farming is huge, and efforts must be made to reduce the impact. But at the same time, there's so many people who depend on farming. How will this be dealt with? Because I can see all the benefits that you're talking about of vertical farming, but how is it going to develop and fit into the rest of the world of farming?
It's a tough question. I wish I had an answer. Obviously, I'd have a crystal ball as well. But I think the way that I see this technology is in just taking advantage of opportunities that exist everywhere. We're not, fossil fuels are going to be driving fossil fuels, and we're going to be consuming it, and we're going to keep extracting. And how do you not crush small farmers? An analysis that I heard that was really interesting that we taught that I didn't put into this was I spoke to someone that builds irrigation systems in Spain, and he was telling me about how, when they build a system like that for a huge 100-acre farm, that a large percentage of whatever they grow wilts on the vine just by nature, whether it's pest, whether it's bird, whether it's water, process, yield, labor, whatever, might wilt on the vine. Then there's another loss that goes from harvest to processing, and then it goes from processing to delivery, delivery to consumer. And to me, where this technology can really make the most improvement is by hopefully better matching production with consumption and reducing the loss. And so ways that you could think about that might work with fossil fuels that could work together is an idea of, if you have 100-acre lettuce farm, right? At what point does what your yield could be with all of that work and all of that capex and all those externalities? How much does that net yield look like if it were in a greenhouse? And would that greenhouse be 5 acres, 10 acres, whatever it is? And if it is 10 acres and you have a 100-acre plot, now could you use carbon credits from the other 90 acres to finance the development of that 5-acre greenhouse? And so that farmer is actually able to work with the entire system of building a more consistent operation to generate the same amount of net produce while taking advantage of carbon credits. It's funny math, but you start to see how these things are all working together, and the technology hopefully will help you break out some of those efficiencies. I don't know. This is a really tough question, actually. So thank you.
It is a tough question, and I think it's very important because I've learned that about 40% of all the food that's grown in our country, perhaps elsewhere, about 40% is thrown away, whether it's after growing in stores and restaurants or whatever. About 40% is simply discarded. So that should not continue like that. And I see huge potential in what you're talking about.
And another thing, and I found a slide that I think is really neat, is that when you talk about like water, as an example, everyone knows California's got water challenges. And so when you look at what California is the #1 producer of crops in the United States, it's a lot of very water intensive crops. And so if you're trying to arbitrage out water, and as well as energy costs and as well as development costs, because if you don't have enough water to grow all the almonds and apricots and dates and stuff, eventually there should be an opportunity where at the market cost somewhere else, they'd be able to take over more of that.
Okay, well, I didn't see any questions come up on Q&A, so I think we've reached the end of this really impressive and so interesting presentation. So Dan, I want to thank you very much for your time. for this great presentation, which, as we mentioned, will be available as a recording. And we're very honored to have you as part of the One Sustainability series. So thank you very much and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you so much. I look forward to connecting with anybody who wants to reach out. Dan@growcomputer.com, and thank you for watching.
Terrific. Thank you.